The sun over the wide rolling plains of Oak Creek was a great golden ball, slowly rising to warm the earth and wake the town. It was a perfect morning, the kind that promised good things. For Simon, a young man with a rancher's strong hands and a heart as steady as the old oak tree on his land, it was the day he had dreamed of for a year. Today he would marry Esther. Simon stood on the porch of his family's ranch house, looking out at the land he loved. He was a quiet man, not given to big speeches, but his feelings ran deep. He remembered the day he knew he loved Esther. It wasn't at a town dance or a fancy party. It was when he saw her being kind to his mother, helping her carry a heavy basket of washing without being asked. He saw a gentle and caring spirit, and he knew that was the kind of heart he wanted to build a life with. A few months later, he had brought her to this very spot, under the shade of that mighty oak tree. His hands were shaking as he got down on one knee and asked her to be his wife. The joyful yes that escaped her lips was the sweetest sound he had ever heard. The town of Oak Creek was small, where everyone knew everyone else's business, and the news of Simon and Esther's engagement had been met with warm smiles. They were a well-matched pair. Simon, with his quiet strength and unwavering faith, and Esther, with her bright smile and lively laugh that could light up a room. For months, the town buzzed with the happy preparations. Simon had saved up to buy the finest wood to build a new rocking chair for their porch. Esther and her friends spent afternoons sewing her wedding dress, a beautiful, simple gown the color of fresh cream. But as the wedding day drew closer, a small, quiet worry began to grow in Esther's heart. It started when she was having tea with some of the other young women in town. They spoke of the hardships of being a rancher's wife, the long days, the loneliness, the weight of so much responsibility. One woman spoke of how she missed her family terribly, living so far from town. Another talked about the endless chores. Esther listened, and the seeds of fear were planted. She began to look at her future life on the ranch not as the beautiful adventure she had dreamed of with Simon, but as a heavy door closing, locking away her youth. The big, quiet house suddenly seemed lonely. The wide open fields felt like a prison. She tried to push the thoughts away, but they whispered to her in the quiet of the night, growing louder and more frightening. She thought of talking to Simon, but she didn't want him to think she was weak or silly. She thought of talking to her wise father, Mr. Jacobs, but she felt too ashamed of her own fears. The morning of the wedding, the sun shone even brighter. Simon, dressed in his best suit, stood tall and nervous in the small church. His heart was pounding a happy, excited rhythm. He glanced at the pews filled with their smiling friends and family. He saw his own mother, Lydia, dabbing a happy tear from her eye. He saw Mr. Jacobs sitting proudly in the front row. The pastor gave him an encouraging nod. Everything was perfect. The organ began to play the familiar song, the one that signals the bride's walk. Every head turned to the back of the church, their faces ready to beam with joy. But the doorway remained empty. A soft murmur rustled through the congregation like a dry wind. Simon's smile slowly faded. He looked at the pastor, who looked back with confusion. Minutes felt like hours. Then a movement at the side door caught everyone's attention. It was Mr. Jacobs, his face pale and etched with a deep, terrible sadness. He walked slowly, heavily, up to Simon and the pastor. He didn't need to speak to the whole church. The look on his face said everything. In a low, broken voice meant only for them, he whispered the words that shattered Simon's world. Esther was gone. She had left on the early morning train, leaving behind only a note for her father that simply read, "I'm so sorry. I can't." The church emptied in a hushed, sad silence. Friends patted Simon's shoulder, their eyes full of pity, but no one knew what to say. The beautiful wedding decorations now seemed to mock him. Simon walked out of the church, the bright sun feeling cold on his skin. He went back to his ranch, to the home he had built for the two of them. He took off his suit, folded it carefully, and put on his work clothes. He worked until his muscles ached, trying to outrun the hurt and the shame. That evening, he sat alone on his porch, the very spot where he had dreamed of sitting with Esther. The stars came out, brilliant and countless in the vast, dark sky. He felt very small and very alone. He bowed his head and prayed. It wasn't a long or fancy prayer. It was a simple, aching cry from a broken heart. "Lord," he whispered, "I don't understand, but I trust you. Help me to forgive her. And please show me what to do now." He didn't feel a sudden miracle, but a small, quiet peace settled over his heart. The pain was still there, a heavy weight in his chest, but he made a choice right then and there, to trust that God still had a plan for his life, even if he couldn't see it through the tears. The turning of the seasons on the ranch was a quiet, predictable thing. The lush green of summer gave way to the fiery colors of autumn, which were then buried under the pure white silence of winter. 2 whole years passed in this manner, each sunrise and sunset marking another day that Simon had endured. The sharp, stabbing pain of Esther's abandonment had, over many long months, dulled into a constant, low ache, a scar on his heart that he had learned to live with. He had thrown himself into the work of the ranch with a quiet determination, finding a strange comfort in the endless cycle of chores. The fences were mended stronger than before, the barn was repaired with fresh, clean wood, and the herd of cattle grew under his careful watch. He was a familiar figure in town, still kind and polite, but the easy smile that once came so readily was now a rare sight. He had become a man of even fewer words, his thoughts often seeming to be somewhere far away. His mother Lydia watched him with a gentle, worried heart, but she knew better than to push. She simply prayed for her son and trusted that time and faith would do their healing work. Meanwhile, in a bustling city far from the quiet plains of Oak Creek, Esther was living a life she had never imagined. The initial thrill of freedom had been as short-lived as a summer storm. The city was loud, crowded, and lonely. She found work as a seamstress in a noisy factory, her days spent in a room filled with the constant hum of machines and the tired faces of other women. The money was little, and her small rented room was cold and cheerless. At first, she had told herself she was on a grand adventure, but the reality was a wearying grind of hard work and profound loneliness. She missed the smell of fresh hay and the wide-open sky. She missed the sound of her father's voice and the warmth of her old home. But most of all she missed Simon. His steady presence, his quiet strength, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled at her. Her great fear of commitment now seemed like a foolish, childish ghost compared to the very real emptiness of her life. She had run from what she thought was a cage, only to find herself in a different, colder one of her own making. She started attending a small church in the city, and there, surrounded by strangers, she finally began to truly pray. She asked God for forgiveness for the pain she had caused, and for the courage to face the mess she had left behind. One rainy afternoon, as she was mending a torn coat, the needle slipped and pricked her finger. As a single drop of blood welled up, a clear, certain thought settled in her heart. It was time to go home. She wasn't sure what she would find or if she would even be welcome, but she knew she could not stay away any longer. She saved her pennies for the train fare, her heart a mixture of dread and a fragile, budding hope. The journey back felt both endless and too short. When the train finally chugged into the familiar small station of Oak Creek, her hands were trembling. The town looked just the same, yet completely different to her eyes. She walked through the streets, her head held low, feeling the weight of curious and remembering stares from people she had known her whole life. Her father, Mr. Jacobs, was weeding his garden when he saw her walking up the path. He did not run to her with open arms, nor did he turn her away. He simply stopped his work and stood, his wise eyes taking her in. "Esther," he said, his voice thick with emotion. They talked for a long time on the porch. She poured out her heart, her regrets, her shame. She did not make excuses for herself. She simply confessed that she had been wrong and that she was sorry. Her father listened, and then he held her, his forgiveness as quiet and sure as the man himself. It was he who told her that Simon had never left the ranch, that he had become a more solitary man, but a good and respected one. The following Tuesday, knowing Simon would be in town to pick up supplies, Esther gathered every bit of her courage and went to the general store. The bell above the door jingled, and there he was, his back to her, looking at a bag of nails. Her breath caught in her throat. When he turned around, the air in the room seemed to vanish. He looked older, his face more lined, but his eyes were the same clear, honest eyes she remembered. For a long moment they just looked at each other. "Simon," she finally whispered, her voice trembling. Might I have a word with you?" He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. Later that day she walked out to his ranch, the path as familiar as the back of her hand. She found him on the porch, in the very rocking chair he had built for her. She stood before him, not as the carefree girl he had loved, but as a woman humbled by life. She told him everything. She spoke of the fear that had felt so large it blinded her, of the lonely days in the city, of the regret that had eaten at her every single day. "I was wrong, Simon," she said, tears streaming freely down her face. "I was selfish and scared, and I hurt you in a way I can never fully take back. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I am so truly, deeply sorry." Simon was quiet for a long time, listening to the sounds of the evening settling around them. The old hurt warred with the love he had never fully been able to let go of. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the girl who had run away, but a woman who had come back, seeking forgiveness. "Esther," he said, his voice low and steady, "I won't lie to you. You're leaving, it near broke me. But a long time ago I made a choice to forgive you. I gave that hurt to God and I asked Him to take it from me." He paused, choosing his words with care. "Forgiveness is one thing. Trust, that's another. It's like a broken fence. It can be mended, but it takes time and careful work to make it strong again." And so they began again, not as a courting couple, but as two people starting from the very beginning. They began to spend time together, slowly and carefully. They would talk on the porch after church. He showed her the new calves in the spring. She would bring a picnic basket and they would share a meal under the old oak tree. Their conversations were different now. They spoke of their faith, of what they had learned in their time apart, of their hopes and their prayers. Simon saw the change in her. Her faith was no longer just something she did on Sunday, it was the core of who she had become. Her laughter returned, but it was a softer, more grateful sound. The old, fearful look in her eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet strength. Months passed, turning one season into the next. One evening, as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, Simon turned to her. He took her hands in his touch firm and sure. "Esther," he said, his voice full of emotion. "We've walked a hard road to get back here. My love for you never truly died, it just waited. I believe God brought you back to me not as the girl you were, but as the woman you are now. Will you marry me? Will you let us build the life we were always meant to have, with God as our foundation?" This time there was no fear in Esther's heart, only a soaring, certain joy. Her yes was not a whisper of excitement, but a strong, clear promise, a vow made with a heart that had been tested and had finally come home. The little white church in Oak Creek had never looked more beautiful. Sunlight streamed through the clean, clear windows, casting warm pools of light on the wooden pews, which were filled with the same friends and family who had gathered 2 years before. But this time the air was not tense with worry, it was thick with a joyful and grateful peace. The same organ played the same song, but today the melody was a promise fulfilled, not a promise broken. Simon stood at the altar, his heart beating a steady, strong rhythm of certainty. He watched the back of the church, not with nervous fear, but with a patient and deep love that had been tested by fire and found to be pure. When Esther appeared on her father's arm, a collective, soft sigh of happiness moved through the room. She was not the nervous girl who had once fled, but a woman radiant with calm purpose. Her gaze was fixed on Simon, and the love shining in her eyes was as clear and true as the morning sky. Mr. Jacobs placed her hand in Simon's, his own eyes glistening with tears of joy, the painful memory of the last time finally healed by this moment of grace. The pastor spoke of the sacred bond of marriage, of the importance of faith, forgiveness, and commitment. When Simon and Esther said their vows, their voices were strong and clear, promising to love and cherish each other for better or for worse, all the days of their lives. This time, the promise was sealed not just with a kiss, but with the unbreakable strength of a second chance. Life on the ranch for Mr. and Mrs. Simon was a beautiful, shared journey. They worked side by side, their partnership a well-practiced dance. Simon tended to the cattle and the land, while Esther turned the house into a warm and welcoming home, filling it with the smell of fresh bread and the sound of her gentle humming. They did not forget the pain of their past. Instead, they used it as a foundation, a reminder of God's mercy and the preciousness of the love they had been given back. Every evening, without fail, they would sit together on the porch, sometimes talking about their day, sometimes sitting in a comfortable silence, reading their Bibles or simply watching the stars appear one by one. Their faith was the center of their home, the compass that guided them through every small challenge and every great joy. They were a living example to the town of Oak Creek of what it meant to truly forgive and to truly rebuild. One cool spring evening, as they sat in their rocking chairs, Esther shared the most wonderful news. She told Simon that their family was going to grow. They were going to have a baby. The joy that filled Simon's heart was so immense he could find no words. He simply held his wife's hands, his own eyes wet with tears of gratitude, and together they prayed, thanking God for this incredible blessing. The months that followed were a time of happy preparation. Simon, with great care and love, carved a small cradle from a beautiful piece of oak wood. Esther sewed tiny clothes and soft blankets, her heart filled with a quiet, awe-filled wonder. They talked often about the future, about the kind of parents they hoped to be, and they prayed every day for the healthy and safe arrival of their child. When the time came, the ranch house was filled with a flurry of quiet activity. Simon's mother, Lydia, came to help, her face beaming with a grandmother's anticipation. After hours of waiting and prayer, the the sound of a strong, healthy cry filled the house. The doctor presented Simon with his son, a tiny, perfect baby boy with a thatch of dark hair. As Simon carefully cradled his child for the first time, looking down into the small, sleeping face, he felt a love so powerful it took his breath away. He looked at Esther, who was tired but glowing with a profound happiness, and he knew that his life was now completely full. A few days later, as they sat together as a family on their porch, they named their son Daniel, a name that means, "God is my judge." They chose this name as a reminder for their son and for themselves that they should always live their lives to honor God, whose perfect plan and timing had brought them through heartbreak and into this beautiful, abundant life. The seasons continued to turn and the little family flourished. Baby Daniel grew into a sturdy, happy toddler, his laughter echoing across the yard as he followed his father on small, unsteady legs. The ranch was a place of love and learning, where Daniel was taught simple prayers and the names of all the animals. One evening, after a long and satisfying day, Simon and Esther sat on their porch, just as they did every night. Daniel was sleeping soundly in his father's arms, his little chest rising and falling peacefully. The sky was a deep velvet blue, dotted with a million brilliant stars, the very same stars Simon had looked upon with such a lonely and broken heart years before. He put his arm around Esther, drawing her close. She rested her head on his shoulder, and they looked out at their land, their home, their future. There were no words needed. The gentle rocking of their chairs, the soft sounds of the night, and the warm, sleeping weight of their son in Simon's arms said everything. Their love story had not been a simple one. It had been a path marked by a painful mistake, a long season of waiting and the hard, beautiful work of forgiveness. But through it all, their faith had been the anchor that held them fast. They had learned that God's plans are often different from our own, but they are always, always good. They had received their second chance, and they had built a forever after that was more beautiful than any first dream could ever have been. If this story of faith, forgiveness, and second chances has touched your heart, there are many more tales of hope and love waiting for you. To be sure you never miss one, remember to subscribe to this channel. A simple click helps bring more light and encouragement to others, just as this story was shared with you. Thank you for listening, and may your own life be filled with the same enduring faith and love.